Understanding a trap and escaping it are two different things. Most people who have genuinely thought about the mechanics of status, who have read the right frameworks, studied the right examples, recognize the structural logic of how authority compounds and how reach erodes it, are still, if they are honest, in approximately the same position they were before they understood any of it. The knowledge is real, the shift is not. And that gap between knowing how the system works and actually building something within it is where most intelligent men spend years of their lives without quite being able to name what is keeping them there. This is not a video about understanding the problem. We have covered that ground. The trap is clear. The platform that trains you to optimize for the metric it measures rather than the authority the market rewards. The behavioral patterns that signal abundance when scarcity was the currency you needed. The diffuse presence that produces reach without the specificity that produces weight. If you are here, you already understand the diagnosis. What we are doing now is something harder and something more valuable. We are talking about construction. About the deliberate act of building a position from the ground up, with the architectural precision of someone who has decided that compounding rather than performing is the game they are actually in. About what Machiavelli, who thought more clearly about the founding of durable power structures than anyone before or since, would say to the man who finally understands what he is building toward and needs to know how to start building it for real. The gap between understanding and execution is not a knowledge gap, it is a commitment gap, and closing it requires something specific, something Machiavelli would have recognized immediately, something that every person who has ever built genuine structural authority has done at some point, whether consciously or not. It requires a founding act. Why understanding is not enough? There is a particular kind of paralysis that intelligent people are more vulnerable to than anyone else, and it is worth naming precisely because it masquerades so convincingly as wisdom. The man who has studied the mechanics of positioning understands, perhaps better than anyone around him, how many ways a deliberate move can go wrong. He knows that committing to a specific territory means abandoning others. He knows that building a legible identity closes certain doors even as it opens different ones. He knows that the act of declaring a position invites scrutiny, that the moment you stake a claim to a specific kind of authority, you have also created a specific set of people who are motivated to challenge it. He knows all of this, and the knowing produces a specific response. He continues to wait, to refine his thinking, to gather more information, develop the territory further in private, prepare more thoroughly before making any public commitment. This feels like prudence. It is actually the most common form of positioning failure, and it is structurally indistinguishable from the failure of the man who never understood the mechanics at all. Both men are in the same place a year from now. One has an elaborate intellectual justification for why he is there. The other simply does not know why. Machiavelli was unambiguous about this kind of hesitation. He wrote about fortune as a current, powerful, indifferent, continuous. The man who waits for the current to calm before he enters does not find calmer water. He finds a current that has moved past him, that has carried someone less cautious to the position he was preparing to occupy. Fortune, Machiavelli argued, does not reward preparation in the abstract. It rewards decisive entry combined with the adaptability to respond to what the current reveals once you are inside it. The preparation that matters is not the preparation that delays entry. It is the preparation that makes you capable of sustaining the commitment once you have made it. There is something else in that observation that deserves to be stated directly. The compounding mechanism that produces genuine authority does not wait for you to be ready. It starts, or it does not start, based entirely on whether you have made the commitment to begin building. Every day that the foundation is not being laid, the gap between your current position and the position of the man who started building 3 years ago is not remaining constant. It is widening. because his structure is compounding and yours is not yet in motion. This is the asymmetry that the intelligent observer finds most difficult to sit with. Not just that he is behind, but that the distance is not linear, that the man ahead of him has not simply had more time. He has had more compounding time, and there is no way to recover that without starting, and no benefit to delaying the start by another day's worth of additional preparation. The founding act does not require perfect conditions. It requires decision. What Machiavelli understood about founding. Machiavelli spent considerable intellectual energy on a question that most political theorists of his era avoided. Why do some structures of power last across generations while others collapse almost as soon as the founder is gone? Why does the same quality of person, operating in apparently similar conditions, sometimes build something permanent and sometimes build something that dissolves at the first serious pressure? His answer was not about luck, though he acknowledged fortune's role. It was not about raw capability, though he respected it. It was about the quality of the founding, the clarity, deliberateness, and structural logic with which the foundation was laid before the building began. The prince who founded well, who defined his position clearly at the outset, built his authority on a coherent and specific base, established the conditions under which he would operate before those conditions were imposed on him by circumstance, created a structure that could sustain pressure because it had been designed to sustain pressure. Its roots were in chosen ground, not inherited ground. Its walls faced the directions that mattered, not the directions that were accidentally available. The prince who drifted into power, who accumulated authority gradually, opportunistically, without a deliberate founding logic, found that every position he held was contested, every gain provisional, every alliance uncertain. Not because he was less capable, but because nothing had been founded. There was no structure to defend. There was only a series of positions that could be taken from him one by one, because none of them had been built from a coherent architectural logic that made the whole more resilient than the sum of its parts. Translate this into the construction of digital and professional authority, and the principle becomes immediately practical. The man who has built a genuine position in his domain has, at some point, made a founding commitment. He chose a specific territory, not a broad category, not an entire field, but a precise intersection of expertise and perspective that was genuinely his, and that nobody else in his space occupied in quite the same way. And then he built from that foundation with a consistency that was not accidental. Every public signal he sent reinforced the same picture. Every piece of content that carried his name added another layer to the same structure. Every association he cultivated was selected for its compatibility with the territory he was building in. Every absence from conversations that did not serve that territory was a deliberate contribution to the clarity of the signal he was sending. Over time, months, years, the compounding effect of that consistency produced something that no single piece of content could ever produce: a position. A defined, recognizable, specific position in the minds of the people who mattered in his domain. A position that arrived in those minds before he did, that preceded him into rooms he had not yet entered, that made introductions unnecessary because the work of introduction had already been done by the accumulated weight of a consistently reinforced signal. That is what founding looks like in practice, not a single dramatic declaration. A commitment, followed by consistency, followed by the patience to allow compounding to do what compounding does when the foundation is genuine. The architecture of a territory, the founding act, begins with a decision that most people postpone indefinitely because it feels like a narrowing, a decision to stop being potentially relevant to everything and to start being definitively authoritative about something specific. This is the deepest resistance in the positioning process, and it deserves to be addressed directly rather than bypassed. The man who has broad expertise, who has genuine capability across a wide range of related areas, who has spent years developing competence in a domain that contains multitudes, that man experiences the decision to choose a specific territory as a sacrifice. He is giving something up. He is leaving value on the table. He is closing the doors that his breadth could have opened. He is also, through that sacrifice, doing the only thing that actually builds the kind of authority he is looking for. Because the authority he is looking for, the kind that produces inbound rather than outbound, that generates referrals from people who have never consumed his content, that makes his name appear in private conversations he will never witness, is not produced by breadth. It cannot be. Breadth produces range. Depth produces authority. And depth, by definition, requires concentration, the sustained application of attention and signal to a specific territory over time, without the dilution that breadth always produces. The question is not which of your interests to abandon. The question is which intersection of your genuine expertise and distinctive perspective produces a territory that is specific enough to be ownable. I'm valuable enough to attract the audience you need, and genuine enough to sustain the depth that compounding requires. Visible everywhere, specific nowhere, is the formula for ambient presence, recognized without weight, known without consequence. The practical test of a good territory is this: can someone who has been observing your digital presence for 6 months complete this sentence precisely? He is the person who thinks most clearly about X, not he covers X, not he posts about X. Thinks most clearly, has the distinctive perspective, occupies the specific intellectual position in this domain that nobody else occupies in quite the same way. If they can complete that sentence, you have a territory. If they cannot, if the answer is he posts about several things in Y field, or he covers a lot of ground in Z space, you do not yet have a territory. You have a presence. Presence does not compound. Territory does. The founding act is the decision to build a territory rather than a presence, and that decision has a specific behavioral signature. From the day you make it, every piece of public signal you send is either a reinforcement of the territory or a dilution of it, and you choose reinforcement every time. Not because the dilutions are not interesting, not because you do not have genuine views on adjacent topics, because you have understood that the compounding mechanism requires consistency, and consistency requires the discipline to protect the signal you are building. From the noise you could easily be generating instead. Visibility is cheap. Position is rare. The algorithm can give you visibility overnight. Only discipline, sustained across time, builds the kind of position that makes your name the one that appears in the right conversation without you in the room to advocate for it. The behavioral signals that build the foundation. Once the territory is chosen and the founding commitment is made, the architectural work is continuous and specific. It operates on 4 distinct dimensions, each reinforcing the others, each contributing to the compounding that produces the gravity that cannot be manufactured by any single act. The first dimension is signal consistency. Every public appearance, every piece of content, every comment, every collaboration, every interview, every association either reinforces the same picture or complicates it. The sophisticated operator trains himself to see every public signal as a contribution to a single, cumulative image forming in the minds of the specific observers who matter to his positioning. The question before every act of public communication is not, is this interesting? Or, will this perform? It is, does this deepen the territory or dilute it? That question, asked consistently enough to become instinctive, is the behavioral engine of compounding. The second dimension is association architecture. The people you engage with publicly, the voices you elevate, the collaborations you pursue, the referrals you accept and offer. These are continuous political communications about the level at which you operate. The man who is building genuine authority in a defined territory treats his public associations the way Machiavelli's prince treated his court, as a deliberate expression of his judgment, his standards, and the level of discourse he considers worthy of his engagement. Not with coldness or exclusion, but with the clarity of someone who understands that who you are, seen thinking alongside, is a primary signal of where you sit in the intellectual hierarchy of your domain. The third dimension is the governance of your presence. How often you appear, where you appear, what conversations you enter, and, critically, which ones you allow to pass without your contribution. The man who has founded a genuine territory can afford to allow his presence to be selective, because the foundation of the territory provides the context that makes selectivity legible as authority rather than absence as avoidance. When he speaks, it lands differently than the commentary of the man who speaks about everything, because the observer has been conditioned through consistent behavioral pattern to understand that this person appears when they have something specific and valuable to contribute to their territory. That conditioning is not built by a single act of restraint. It is built by the accumulated pattern of it across months until it becomes the environmental expectation. The fourth dimension is the patience to allow the compounding to operate on its own timeline, which is longer than anxiety will want to accept and shorter than perpetual preparation will ever produce. The founding act, consistently maintained, produces results that are invisible for a period that feels unsatisfying to the man still comparing himself to the metrics the platform shows him. The follower count is not moving at the rate the high-frequency posters is moving. The engagement is not spiking the way reactive content spikes. What is moving, silently, continuously, in the minds of specific observers who are forming a model of who this person is and what they stand for, is the weight of the position. And weight, unlike reach, does not dissipate when the posting stops. It persists. It travels. It enters rooms without the person attached to it. That is the compounding that changes everything, and it cannot be rushed. It can only be started and sustained and trusted to do what compounding does. The founding act as identity. There is a dimension of this framework that goes beyond tactics and behavioral architecture, and it is the dimension that separates the man who executes these principles for a season and then drifts from the man who builds something permanent. Machiavelli's most durable founders were not men who applied strategic principles to their situation from the outside. They were men for whom the strategic principles had become indistinguishable from their character. Men who were not strategically disciplined about their positioning because they had decided to be disciplined, but because they had internalized a set of convictions about who they were and what they stood for that made the discipline natural. The territory was not a strategic choice they maintained. It was an expression of something genuinely theirs. The consistency was not a tactic they applied. It was the natural consequence of a stable identity. This is the deepest level of what the founding act requires, and it is the reason that the territory must be genuine, must represent real depth and real perspective rather than strategic opportunity identified by market analysis. A fabricated territory collapses under the pressure of the scrutiny that arrives as authority accumulates. A genuine territory, one that reflects the actual intersection of your expertise and your distinctive way of seeing, becomes more defensible over time rather than less, because the man inhabiting it is not performing it. He is living it. And the difference is legible to exactly the observers whose judgment matters most. The algorithm makes you visible, only discipline makes you valuable. And only genuine commitment to a territory that is authentically yours makes the discipline sustainable over the timescale on which compounding operates. Most people don't realize this until years have passed and the opportunity cost has become impossible to ignore. Until the man who founded deliberately 3 years ago is so far ahead on the compounding curve that the gap feels insurmountable. It is not insurmountable. But it is real, and it widens every day that the founding act is delayed in favor of one more day of preparation. The founding act is not a declaration. It is a decision followed by a first consistent signal, followed by another, until the consistency itself has become the message, until the pattern of deliberate, specific, patient construction is indistinguishable from the identity of the man executing it. That is the architecture, not complex, not secret, not available only to the exceptional, available to anyone willing to stop understanding it and start building it. The compounding does not begin when you are ready. It begins when you decide, and the distance between those two moments is entirely under your control.